It's the Low Tox Life podcast, and I am Alex Stewart, your host. Today is show 441, and we are exploring sick buildings and how they produce sick people, specifically mold.
Our own bacteria, our own virus particles, whatever mold growth that's in our ecosystem, right? Microplastics, I mean, you name it. The chemicals you use to clean your house, we're regurgitating all that stuff. We're constantly breathing it in because the lack of air exchange from inside to outside that we have due to this massive push for energy efficiency.
If you can believe it, my family has moved 11 times in the past 5 years. In the past 15 years, 15 times. Unfortunately, my story is not one that is unique or odd or weird, because as I've started to advocate, once I figured out what was going on with me, people have come out from all around the world to explain just what issues they've had with their buildings, illnesses that they've experienced, and the injustice goes across many different industries, and the work that we need to do is complex, but it's not impossible. Enter my guest this week, Michael Rubino. Michael has put his background in construction and remediation to very good use, founding HomeCleanse in 2017 that operates across the whole of America. What he does is advocate for change in not just the building industry, but the way we recognize and treat mold. And like me, arguing for the investment in better buildings and really good remediation, because the cost of the illness and the cover-up jobs is far worse. So in today's show, we are going to explore all of that. Now, we cannot do this show without our wonderful partners, Block Blue Light, that helps you block evening blue light exposure, now known to affect our circadian rhythm and our sleep. I don't know about you, but I'm a midlife woman and my sleep is dang precious. And so we run light bulbs, glasses, sleep masks, 15% off, blockbluelight.com. Low Tox Life is your code. And then, of course, you also have Oz Climate, our major partner on the show. This one's for the Aussies, giving you 10% off with the code Low Tox Life, site-wide for all of their dehumidifying, purifying, heating and cooling appliances. Enjoy the show. Michael, hello. How you doing?
Hey, how are you? I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I am great. I am excited to have you back on the show. We have talked mold a couple of times before, and I feel like as this topic progresses in awareness, as well as in pressure across a multitude of industries who are still continuing to ignore, but kind of know their time's running out thanks to people like you and me getting a bit louder.
Yeah.
It's time to have another conversation. I'd love to start, Michael, with the Change the Air Foundation and some of the inroads you've been having there, attracting some celebrity ambassadors to really make some noise. I've loved that for you guys, as well as some wins at the policy level in a couple of states.
Yeah, we had a really great win last year in Illinois. The issue in the United States is interesting because we find that the states are not so united. They all have their different state legislations and they all have their different rules. And you would be surprised to know that there are only really 7 states in the U.S. that require any sort of licensure for mold inspections, mold remediation. So that means for most of the U.S., you can literally be a lawn care person one day, wake up, have an idea, I'm going to go and remediate mold for people, and become a mold remediator the next day.
We have the same problem here. It's so cowboy. People say, oh, I've fixed it. You know, I've had it myself where you're like, I've had people sawing out like planks in my kitchen because the floorboards were so swollen you couldn't get the dishwasher out to see if it was leaking back there. And then they just dump the contaminated planks right next to our fabric chairs and couch. Like, it's crazy. And they're treating me like a crazy person for pointing out that might not be such a great idea. So you don't only get the cowboy factor, but you get the gaslight factor for kicking up a stink about things as well.
Totally. Yeah, and that's a pretty big problem, as you have already kind of highlighted. And for most of America, that is the norm, right? And there's no protections for people. It gets real convoluted when you get into commercial real estate laws and like landlords can, as long as it's within a certain threshold, they can have their handyman go in and touch it. And there's just a lot of reform that's needed there. And so Change the Air Foundation had a really big win. Thanks to the amazing constituents in the great state of Illinois that came in, the volunteers that came in and shared their stories and their struggles and everything they've been through, right? We're lucky at Change the Air Foundation to stand on the shoulders of giants here, people that have really been impacted, that are volunteering their time, that are donating to the foundation to really make sure that the foundation exists. Brandon Chapo is our head of public policy. He's leading that charge, and it's not easy, right? Because there's a lot of opposition. There's change is scary, right? And so you have to constantly educate and create that awareness, and you need a community of people, especially in the U.S. You have to do it state by state. You need a community of people in each state, right, that care enough to want to call their legislators and their senators and say, hey, look, we won't stand for this anymore. And so it's not the easiest thing in the world to do, but when you have these types of wins, you're showing people that it's possible. And through that possibility, you're really uniting more people around this idea. I suspect that we're going to have more wins, in the near future. I think the other really interesting thing that we're fighting for this year is mold in military housing. I mean, it's been a massive issue. It's obviously a national security for our country. I've been a part of this on the litigation side as an expert, and to read some of the emails that I've had to read about, people being overseas and just begging for their family to be taken care of it while they're overseas, working. Their families are struggling literally
working to represent the United States in either conflict or peacekeeping missions. It's not like they're dicking around, kicking back. They're genuinely some of the most important people on the planet. And that's how they get treated. They didn't
sign up for this, right? They didn't sign up for this. And I was talking to one of those there. I was literally on base today, and one of the guys was like, what hurts me the most is my kids didn't sign up for this. And it's like, I've got 2 kids, 6 and 9, Olivia and Mason. When I see families struggling like that, and the kids are struggling, the kids are sick, it really hits close to home. And to be honest, to read through some of these emails and then to see the response from the companies managing these facilities, it's disgusting. The places look aesthetically beautiful. I want to point that out. When you walk through, they look aesthetically beautiful. Right?
It's so important for people to know this, because I was giving a keynote just last week at a building conference, and it was the true cost of buildings. My first slide was, this is what we think when we think, mold contaminated building. And it was like the black mold wall, the peeling paint everywhere, the gutters overflowing and just looking like a really rundown kind of property. And then the next slide, I showed our 5 water damaged homes that we've lived in over the last decade. And the whole room is like, what? Because they're really pretty, lovely apartments, some of them freshly renovated, some of them newly built. There is no pattern to a bad building, actually, I have learned. And so I think this really is a part of making a case for reimagining the word toxicity and what it looks like, and how we investigate it. Yeah,
it is not, everyone has this image in their mind, typically, like mushrooms need to be growing out of the wall or something. And it's totally. That's not the case. People have to also understand there's something called building science, right? Yeah. And there are air patterns that move throughout the house. And in these particular buildings, they're built in Florida. They have no vapor barrier underneath them. Florida is a very humid place. That humidity gets into the building materials because there is no vapor barrier.
Can you just explain for the people who don't get what vapor barrier means? Is that water membrane? Is that the same
It's a thing? Water membrane. It's meant to prevent water vapor as well. It's on the other side of the house, so you're not really concerned about rain. You're concerned about the water vapor or the humidity, right? Which is basically the moisture in the form of water vapor as opposed to water droplets, right? Yeah. So it's if you've ever been to a steam room, you know what I mean. When your skin feels sticky, you could feel the moisture in the air. It's just not raining, right?
I am like the human detector for when we need to switch the dehumidifiers on. I'll come in and I'll be like, yeah, it's definitely over 60% in here. Yeah, and because I can just feel it now. Yeah. Yeah.
And so in these cases, the humidity could be 100% outside because we're in the middle of Florida. That humidity and moisture accumulates in the building materials below the house. And they have drywall below it. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. But
oh no.
Yeah,
And
it's
can you
bad.
just explain drywall for the beginners out there as well?
Yeah.
And the switch from using something a bit sturdier like plaster, which would have been the
Yeah.
traditional material?
Yeah, so in the United States, we love this stuff called drywall. I couldn't tell you why, but it's
We love it too.
basically
It's
a
ridiculous.
4 foot by 8 foot sheet of essentially chalk and paper. Okay, and mold loves paper-based products. I mean, it absolutely loves it. And basically any carbon atoms out there in the world, organic or not, if there is any sort of porosity to it, mold's gonna love to grow around it, feed off of it. You could even see mold growing on glass, okay, which is non-porous, because it'll grow and feed off of the dust accumulating on the glass, right? So mold's it's a fun organism. But essentially, when you build with paper and chalk, right? If that paper and chalk holds on to moisture, which it does, chalk holds on to moisture pretty well, so does paper, right? And we allow that material to stay wet for too long, okay?
Yeah.
The likelihood of mold growth is going to start to go up exponentially. Now, you do not want to put a paper-based material on the outside of a house, I don't care where you live, but specifically not in a tropical climate like Florida. And so I don't know why they have that there, but they have drywall there. Then they have below that, beneath that drywall, you've got like the actual framing of the house that the floor sits on. And then you've got your subfloor, which is an OSB material. OSB is Orient strand board. It's basically like flakes of wood that they glue together and make them, again, out of these 4 foot by 8 foot sheets. And then on top of that, you've got this luxury vinyl flooring, which it locks in the moisture. So now any moisture that gets into those layers of flooring, then it gets stopped at that LVP, as we call it. And now it's got nowhere to go, so it just grows mold, right? It's just trapped. It makes the materials stay wet. They can't dry, and mold starts to grow. Sadly enough, we found this issue about 3 or 4 years ago, and I went there, and people were complaining of being sick, and there was lawsuits. I was like, hey guys, this is really what all you need to do is put a vapor barrier here. Obviously, you have to remediate the space properly, but if you put a vapor barrier here, it'll stop and prevent the problem from happening again. Well, would you be surprised for me to tell you that 3 to 4 years later, there's still no vapor barrier in any of these houses?
Gosh.
And here's the crazy part. As you're driving through, this is like the time of year where people leave these units. They prep them for new families coming in, okay?
Yeah.
And they're just ripping the floor out, okay? And then they're all moldy because I've seen them firsthand with my own eyes. What they're doing is they're replacing like some of the pieces of wood that are really bad, like ones that you're about to fall through, okay? But they're leaving the rest and they're just kind of painting over it. And then they're putting down brand new LVP flooring. The amount of money that costs is not cheap.
No.
And fixing the problem would actually be cheaper than to continuously rip all that stuff out every year or two. But you know what? It's what they're doing. I can't tell you why. Makes no sense. Maybe they feel like they'd be admitting they were wrong in the first place when they built them, right? But they just keep ripping these things out, putting these things in. New families move in, they get sick. Some of these people are going and dealing with mysterious health issues, hospital visits. There's kids being impacted. And we already have a massive problem with kids qualifying medically to even join the military. And here we are putting them in environments, allowing them to grow up in environments where they're getting sick and then they're not qualifying. So it's really this crazy round robin of I feel like a hamster wheel. Now, you might have heard that mold in military housing, especially in the US, was like a big thing years ago. Congress was talking about it, right? Well, what they did was they said, okay, guys, here's what we're going to do. To fix this, we're going to require that these landlords, these military housing landlords, they give you a 7-year work order history. That's going to solve the problem. Let me tell you, it didn't solve the problem.
No.
Because
no, it
you
doesn't
could give
solve
the
the
history
problem.
to somebody, and they're altering the history. We know this because in these cases we've seen 2 different work order histories. One that they provided that looks different than the one that the customer had, right? The person living inside.
Gosh.
So they're just deliberately changing these work order histories and just kind of making it seem like, oh, we're just there for a service call. And it's like, no, you're there for mold. It's like, and then we have a whistleblower in one case who basically told us that they just have this policy, don't say mold. They'll say it's dust instead.
I was seeing this on yours and Christina's socials recently.
Yeah.
As long as you don't say mold, what does that then mean? It means that then you can't follow up with any kind of potential litigation? Is that why we're trying to avoid that word?
I guess, they're trying to avoid liability, if I had to guess, right? If you don't say mold, then you don't need a certified person to come in, right? I mean, like, these families are telling their stories, and they're like, look, we call these people, we see that there's mold there. They're telling us that's not mold, that's dust. And they're coming in, they're just wiping it off and leaving. Well, you and I both know if you're wiping it off and leaving, well, there's a deeper issue, right, going on behind. So it's just going to grow right back through the wall.
Yeah.
We've drilled into these places. We've got photographs. There's mold literally growing through the walls, through the floors, in the attic spaces. I mean, awful. When I tell you, they look beautiful. I mean, the flooring is buckling and it looks a little strange if you know what you're looking for, okay? But other than that, they look beautiful.
Someone would arrive and it's their first military posting and they'd think, honey, we're home. This is so exciting. Yeah.
I walked into one of the homes and you know what it smelled like? These like massive air freshener plug-in things everywhere. And I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. You might be masking some odors here, huh? And they're like, yeah, we had some issues, but I just like it to smell nice. Sometimes it doesn't smell nice. But it's, unfortunately, they just didn't know.
No, there's a literacy problem as well, right?
Yeah,
that's
they
huge
didn't know.
Part of this.
And so it's not until they get sick, they start to see other people get sick, they start to hear about the problems on base, and then they start to connect the dots, right? And they're going to doctors. Because here's the other thing. A lot of these folks are going to doctors, and especially the doctors on base who are kind of not really talking about mold either.
Yeah.
And so they're not getting diagnosed properly, right? They're not asking about their place. They're bringing up maybe my place. I heard about this issue, and they're getting gaslit. And so finally they find out, okay, I've got to go to specialists. Right? And they start going to specialists. They start getting the proper testing done. They start realizing, okay, I've got mold in my body. I've got mycotoxins in my body. This is a problem. I need to get out of there. I need to start removing this from my body. And I know this, like we're talking about this, and I know it might sound doomy and gloomy, but I want to tell you that I think there's a lot of good news. I think the tide is turning.
Yeah,
but it's important.
But it is important. And because we might have people listening who haven't heard the last couple of shows we did over the years or haven't been following the mold issue or are maybe tuning in because they think, I don't know much about mold. I'll listen to this week's show because we go kind of a lot of places with Low Tox Life. Can you share the story of a particular family, really bring to life for people some of the symptoms that some of these people are experiencing?
I mean, the gentleman today is a super nice guy. Had been in the military for 21 years. He literally had to go to the hospital, I think 3 or 4 times and get 3 or 4 different surgeries. He had tachycardia.
What kind of surgeries?
Symptoms. Heart
surgery.
He had 2 of his sinuses were 100% blocked. The other sinuses were about 75% blocked. He had to get 3 or 4 different sinus surgeries just to clear out his sinuses, only to stay in the place that is causing his sinus infections in the first place.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he also had like some heart issues, some tachycardia, he got all this. And it's the thing is, he's going to these doctors, he's getting all this blood work done. Everyone's like, everything looks normal, your arteries look good. I'm not sure why you'd be having those types of symptoms. Right? So then he goes to a specialist, they start to look at his sinuses, your sinuses are blocked, it's a problem, we got to do a surgery. Yeah, this guy, he's like, I have gauze coming down my face, like, I had to keep changing the gauze. I'm bleeding profusely for like 3-4 days every time I have one of these surgeries. I'm not getting better. Back to surgery. He's like, this was like literally $200,000 that he had to spend throughout this journey. The guy not only is he's been in the military for 21 years. Guy loved to play golf. Right? There's a nice little golf course nearby. He would play all the time. Couldn't play golf for like 2 years. His neighbors started to know, hey, I never see you play golf anymore. What's going on with you? Coming around with gauze on your face. Like, what's going on? And, basically, his neighbor saved his life. Because his neighbor's like, hey, look, we've been dealing with some mold issues. My daughter's been coughing. Like, my daughter's been sick for like 2 years with this crazy cough. We couldn't figure out what's wrong with her. Nothing makes sense. Like, and now all of a sudden we realize there's 500 homes in this base have a mold problem that we know about, right? And so
500.
Okay, so then he tells the neighbor, look, hey, we've got it. There's a mold problem here. Maybe that, I don't know, maybe sinuses, mold, it just kind of makes sense. Maybe this is what you're dealing with. He goes and gets tested and his like levels are through the roof, right? And so all of a sudden he starts to realize, holy cow, I've got this issue is affecting me. Because in the beginning, he was like, no way, this can't be. Like, something's just wrong with me. I just have bad genetics or something, right? And then all of a sudden, everything starts to connect. And he's, the number one thing that he said to me was, I am more upset. I feel more guilty about putting my family through this than myself.
Oh,
and
I feel that. Yeah.
It's so hard to hear because you're like, as a dad, as a mom, right? You want to do everything you can for your family, right? And so to hear like that, he didn't put his family in that position. Unfortunately, the people managing these properties put all of these families in that position. And that like the thing that they kept saying that resonated so much with me is like, I signed up for this. My kids didn't sign up for this. And I was like, well, even though you signed up for this, did you really sign up for this? And you didn't sign up for this. Like, they're supposed to take care of you.
But that isn't that one of the most beautiful thing about humans is that we just don't want to hurt the people we love. Like, we can hack it. Take me, kind of, no matter how bad it gets, but please don't do it to the people I love. Like, I think that's something to kind of celebrate, that's where our mind goes, rather than add to the shame of like, don't be silly, it's not about you. But like, from there we can say then nobody deserves this.
Yeah, it's true. Honestly, nobody deserves this. They were very, very good, down-to-earth people, family men, fighting for their country. Like, it checks all the boxes, and the support system they're supposed to have is failing them.
Yeah.
And it's like, to me, when I see the conditions that they're living in, like they're not good conditions. The place might look pretty, but underneath that pretty shell, there's a sick home, and it's causing them to be sick.
And Michael, can you explain for us how it gets from the places we can't see to affecting us so badly if we can't see it? Because I think some newbies here might not get that dust piece, the transfer. Yeah.
So it's a great question. So for a couple different things. First off, no house is hermetically sealed, right? So if you have a floor, you're going to have, like, if you pulled up your floor, you'd have cracks and crevices. Your subfloor, like I talked about this earlier, they're basically 4 foot by 8 foot sheets, right, of flooring. Well, they have seams between them, right? So there's cracks and crevices. You got to remember, things like mold, bacteria, viruses, they're very, very, very small, okay? 25 to 50 times smaller than what you could even see. These are microscopic.
Totally.
So when you're saying, like, Michael, what do you mean? I had some mold on my ceiling and I can see it. Yeah. That means there's a lot there, okay? So 250,000 spores can fit on the head of a pin, just to put things into perspective a little bit. So going back to these cracks and crevices, like the cracks between your floorboards, that is like a theme park entrance, okay, for something as small as mold. It comes right in.
Yeah.
And then I want you to think about this from this perspective. So these specific houses, and like most houses, they have HVAC systems, the modern heating and air conditioning and ventilation systems.
All inducting that you can't see behind.
Yeah, of course. Every time that unit kicks on, it is drawing air from inside that house. Well, most of these homes, okay, the pressure that actually creates is going to draw these particles from the cracks, through the cracks and crevices, into the HVAC system, okay?
Yeah.
And once it's in the HVAC system, it's like the lungs of the home, right? It's going to spread to every room in the house. And that's exactly what was happening. And we have a beautiful video that we shot using like a smoke gun, okay? So we were putting smoke out into the environment. And then we were showing how when the HVAC system turned on, from underneath the floor, underneath the house, smoke was coming up through cracks and crevices and going right towards the HVAC system where it was dispersing. So you're able to visually show and prove how air flows from behind walls, behind ceilings, behind floors, into the living space, getting into the HVAC system, contaminating the HVAC system, and then basically spreading these particles across the airways. And I don't mean to like sound to sound scary. I don't want people to be scared, right? But I just want people to understand how this works.
Yeah, and I think what you're explaining is how we're constantly setting ourselves up to fail as well. From the shitty materials, the not considering what climate you're building in, to ducting in a high turnover residential kind of thing where you don't end up with a sense of care, history, ownership, the things that make one work on their home more than, say, other people who are renting. We know this. I say that as a renter. Like, it all lines us up for failure.
Absolutely.
All it takes is a pair of students who couldn't give a toss about humidity. They don't really feel the hot, humid summer yet because they're young. And then all this moisture is going into the carpet. There's dust in the carpet. There's now mould in the carpet. There's an HVAC. And then boom, you end up with what we tested when we were looking for a new place just a few months ago, an ERMI of 31. And that's a very high ERMI, and that's like you really want to make sure you rip pretty much every material out and start again situation and remediate properly. And that was a very pretty, very modern apartment in Sydney. So I get it. And I think it's the unseen part that, without all having to become specialists and mycologists and physicists about this stuff, to really just know that we're not set up for success right now. And that is what we can all work on together.
You know, there's a moment. This is our moment as a society to make change. That's the way I look at it. Like, you know, we had a moment when we decided we're not having lead in our paint anymore.
Yeah.
Right? Because we understood it was killing kids. It was not good. We got rid of it. Okay. We had a moment when we decided we're not putting asbestos in our houses anymore. Right?
Yeah.
We have to decide as a society if we're going to have a moment right now, and we're going to take water damage and mold more seriously. And I believe that if we do that, then this moment we're going to see quantifiably, we're going to see people healthier. Because it's the unseen, as you said, that people are constantly breathing in and have no idea, right? That causes really the level of inflammation. This is what I believe. I believe it's because you talk to different people, you get different theories. My theory is the level of inflammation that we're dealing with, the disruption to the gut microbiome that's occurring, the ability for some of these toxins to cross the blood-brain barrier, right? You look at all these different things. You're opening the door for chronic disease, right? And you're living, and it's, you look at toxicology, what's one of the theories? Well, it's the dose makes the poison, right? You have too much of this stuff, it's poisonous. Okay. Well, our houses have too much of this stuff. How do we know this? Because we see it.
Yeah.
The EPA says, you know, about 50% of the homes that they surveyed had history of water damage. 80% of those homes, they said visible mold, right? And we're talking about the unseen. So forget visible.
And can I share a couple of Australian stats here?
Please.
So 70% of new builds, so completely new builds, have at least one major defect within the first 2 years. 9 out of 10 of those being water related.
Wow.
New builds, 70%. Now we have some figures coming out of one of our states, Victoria, saying around 9 in 10 insurance claims is water related. And the time at which it takes the claim to be addressed, let alone fixed, is somewhere in the ballpark of 2 weeks to 2 months, when we have 2 days before mold starts growing. So it is so broken on so many levels. And it kind of, like, people might have heard us talking from now, like from the beginning to now, and thought, well, what the heck can we do about this? But there is actually so much we can and need to do. And I think we need to address the idea of cost differently when it comes to government buildings being fixed, like proper fixed, or knock down rebuilt if that's actually what's needed. And how do we build? And what climates need what kind of building materials? Like, do you have a wish list, Michael, of utopia of what could, like, tell me what that is.
Here's my ideal world, all right? We change the building codes so that we're not just so hyper focused on energy efficiency without also making sure the occupants inside these homes are also safe. You have to remember, if you've ever been in a car, like the cars have that button for it's like recycled air. Yeah. That's what's happening in a lot of our modern homes. We're just regurgitating our own bacteria, our own virus particles, whatever mold growth that's in our ecosystem, right? Microplastics, I mean, you name it. The chemicals you use to clean your house, we're regurgitating all that stuff. We're constantly breathing it in because the lack of air exchange from inside to outside that we have, due to this massive push for energy efficiency, we've created a whole new unintended consequence, right? So we need to get, it's not a difficult problem. We could reverse things with things like ERV. We can start bringing in fresh air, still have energy efficient homes. We just have
like
to
that
make sure
passive house kind of
we
model.
have to, right? Like, let's make homes that are efficient, but also think about the occupants inside.
Give it some lungs. It needs lungs.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe some nice natural light, right? Not living in dungeons, you know. So these are the types of things that we should really be focused on, hyper focused on. Not just the energy efficiency, but like we want the whole package. The other thing is when we're building houses, let's think about the materials that we're using. Let's think about the climates in which we're building in. Because if we're in different climates, you're going to need different strategies, right? You're not going to put a dehumidifier in a house in the middle of Arizona in the desert, okay?
Yeah.
But you are going to put one in Florida when you live in a tropical climate. Or in the northeast of the U.S. is another, you know, where we have, you know, humid summers. Yeah, you have to think about like the region in which you're building in. To build a house on stilts in Florida, like they did here on these bases, and then not have a vapor barrier, like this is an exact example of how you don't build a house in the exact location that house was built in.
Yeah.
Here's the other thing. Like when you're building houses, if you want to build out of wood, okay, wood's semi-porous. So do I have a problem building out of wood? Not necessarily. However, you know, just like concrete, just like wood, you have to understand that because it is semi-porous, it has to dry, okay? When we decided we're going to go from building houses in 2 years to 4 months, and we're just going to put houses up, and the second that they're up, we're just going to slap insulation and wall boards inside, okay? Well, that wood that didn't dry properly, guess what happened? You trapped the moisture, mold started to grow. This is why people move into brand new homes that get sick. And it's like, how's that possible? Well, that's just one way it's possible. Here's the other way it's possible. If you're going to build with wood, maybe don't put it in the soil, okay, for 6 weeks and let it just get rained all over.
Say it like that. And we see it. We're driving down a highway or a big street and you see that it's raining that day and you see the wood frame building with the like posts going into the dirt and you're like, should we maybe, you know, and I always used to kind of wonder about that. But like, it's terrible.
Well, let me tell you what happens. Mold is abundant in the soil. It's part of our ecosystem. It's in the soil. Bacteria is abundant in the soil. Okay, it's part of our ecosystem, right? That mold and that bacteria transfers onto the wood because now it has enough moisture, and mold and bacteria is like food, right? And it's going to just feed off of that wood, and it's going to sit there, and it's going to grow into the wood, and we're going to have enough moisture, and then they're going to be like, that's just dirt. It's okay. Let's put up the house. And then the house gets put up, and then you wonder why when you look up in your brand new house, like, why is that wood all like black? I don't understand. Black spots everywhere. Well, that's mold. And it's there because they sat the lumber in the soil for roughly 6-8 weeks before they, you know, the framers got there to frame out the house. And then now it's there. And then I actually had a builder tell me, you know, but once we encapsulate this with some insulation and drywall, it won't hurt you. It's benign. And I was like, okay, where did you get that information? Because it's so incorrect that it's dangerous. Okay, you can't be telling people stuff like that.
How do we get builders on side here to see the benefit of doing it right? Because that's the kind of building business that's probably a small to medium business. Not everyone's a huge conglomerate that can afford to take a hit here and there. Sure. So a small to medium business that then becomes one of these 70% of homes with one or more major defects that if it's in that first few years of building, you can then start that battle to get it fixed properly and corrected within your building insurance. And so that is very expensive to a small building firm to then have to deal with that problem. So how, because this is the true cost piece, right? Like you think, oh, you know, a builder wants to do it cheap, fast, impress the clients, move on. But actually, if you have a major defect within the first 2 years, that is not move on. That becomes your nightmare as a business owner, as well as the person who spent their life savings on this new mortgage for this dream home.
You know, let's talk about the cost of doing it and let's talk about the cost of not doing it.
Yeah.
Okay. The cost of doing it, well, you're going to need to probably create some platforms to elevate the lumber out of the soil.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to cost you a couple $100. Okay. In the grand scheme of things, a couple $100 is going to save you tens of thousands of dollars later. Right? So we'll circle back to that in a second.
Yeah.
So you're talking, some platforms that could be made out of wood. It's okay. It's just as long as the wood you're going to use to build the house, right, is elevated up and out of the soil. The rest of the wood that you use, you're just going to throw it away, essentially, right? It's throwaway wood. So you're building these platforms, you're resting the lumber that's going to be used on the house, you're wrapping it in plastic, leaving the both ends open for ventilation. So you're wrapping basically the entire bundle of wood, but the ends, like the caps, if you will, those have to stay open for ventilation purposes. You're then, so that's a couple $100 in materials and logistics, right? To build these platforms, rest that on. Honestly, it just needs supports probably every 12 inches or so. And you just need to keep it out about 12 inches out of the soil, right? So it's nothing crazy that needs to be built here. Okay. It's in the Structural Components Buildings Association's guide, by the way. Like, it's how do you build houses and keep the lumber out of the soil as part of it. There's a whole guide on it. It's not rocket science. Very simple, not
readily
costly.
findable on the interwebs, right? I'd imagine.
Readily, yeah. Like if you're building a house, you should be reading the Structural Building Components Association's guides anyway, because they're great guides on how to build homes. There's a great platform already. You build this platform, you drop your lumber, it's wrapped. You could leave it there for 8 weeks if you want, 10 months, doesn't matter, because you're protected. And then when you unwrap the lumber, you're ready to build the house. So you unwrap it, you build the house. That means that your slab's done, right? So you can transfer that wood onto the slab, start to build your house out of the lumber. And then guess what? Even then, it's going to rain, right? But it's not in the soil. So we're not just having like colonies of mold transfer from the soil onto the lumber, right? Now, is there spores in the air? Yes, of course. Now, if it rains for 3 days straight, what do you need to do? You're going to need to dry the place out. Well, how do you do that? Well, when it's called dried in for a reason, because you're supposed to dry it in.
Yeah.
We've kind of lost the art of that, right? So actually...
Just from beginner's mind again, because I don't know that I've quite understood this. We are talking about when we see these wood frames of houses just kind of hanging out and it's rained for 3 days straight. And we're trying to figure out how to dry an open air structure at this point. Is that what we're talking about?
No, so...
Okay. I'm really glad I asked because...
Yeah, if it's an open air structure, obviously you can't dry it out.
No.
What you do is you have to make sure that the material... Basically on the outside of the house, right? Wood obviously is going to have 4 sides to it. Yeah. On the outside of the house, you typically are going to put some sort of like plywood up, okay?
Yeah, I got it.
You're going to put the plywood up. You know, there's a lot of different materials you can use, but I would say the most common you'd see is plywood. You put plywood up, then they would typically put like a house wrap on top of that, right? So you want to do your house wrap when you've had some nice days of sun out there. You don't want it to do a monsoon rain and then you put your house wrap on the next day. That would be crazy.
Yeah.
You'd want to let that moisture dissipate, get a couple days of sun, put the house wrap on. Now you're building outside as a little bit watertight, right? You have to have your waterproofing on the roof done. I would even argue if you don't have your windows in yet, you should either get them in or you should seal them with plastic, right? So that you don't have this open air exchange, because it's going to be pretty hard to dry a structure when you've got all this air exchange.
Yeah.
I would never recommend insulating or drywalling or whatever, even plasterboard. I would never recommend anything unless the entire house is sealed. Like when I drive around and I see people drywalling inside and there's no garage door. There's no windows. Doors, there's no windows.
Wow.
They're just like begging for it, right? And they do that.
That is so common though, Michael.
It is, I know. It's crazy. So we want to dry it in, right? So what does that actually mean? It means that the waterproofing is done. I don't care if the facade's not done yet. I don't care if like the full final roofing material isn't done, because the waterproofing membrane is what keeps the water away, right? So if we've got the vapor barriers, we've got the waterproofing membranes, the windows are in, doors are in, right? Now we can put dehumidifiers on inside. And we can use moisture meters to check the moisture of the wood. Okay, if the moisture of the wood's at 20%, good. Let's keep drying it. Let's get it down. It starts to get into the 12% range. Okay, we're good. Now we can start bringing in insulation and drywall, right? And so it's making sure, it's just making sure and checking. It's not really difficult to do. And it might delay you a day or two bringing in the trades. But that's what it is. We're talking about like slowing down for a day or two. You know what I mean? Just to do things properly so we can avoid having water damage and mold. Now, what's the cost if we don't do all that stuff?
Yeah.
If we don't invest a day or two, if we don't put the platforms, if we don't do it right, we're going to have mold growth all over the lumber, right? Now, on the cheap end, to get a company to come in and like blast it off, use like media blasting, soda blasting, ice blasting, sand blast, whatever you want to blast with, you're probably going to look at a $10,000-$15,000 ordeal. So like a couple $100 and waiting a couple days and ensuring and doing this right is going to cost you at least 10-15 grand, if not more, depending on the size of the house, right? To remediate that. And even that, you ought to find a company that's going to clean up after themselves, because you're just ricocheting the mold off of the lumber. And now you got to wipe it down.
You need the air scrubbers and everything.
Right.
And this is still talking about a private ownership situation with a private build. Once we switch this conversation to public housing and public schools, hospitals, whatever, like even less likely that it's going to be done the right way if something like this pops up as a major defect in the first couple of years.
Totally. You want to talk about cowboys? Yes. Yeah, because there's no oversight. There's no oversight. And, people say, well, aren't there building codes? Don't building codes look out for us? I mean, there are codes. Yeah.
But who's enforcing?
But who's enforcing the codes, number one? Number two, like the code enforcement it's very minimal. Like, is the plumbing, is the house built structurally sound? Is the plumbing correct? Is the electrical correct? They're not really looking for water damage and mold. That's not part of the case, right?
I've started, as soon as I got the mold memo, I started telling all my friends who were buying property at any point, you do not just take a building inspector with you, you take a mold technician. You want to make sure that everything has been assessed, because that's not really a huge part of a building inspector's remit. They haven't trained in mold assessment necessarily. Some may have gotten that extra qualification to be able to talk about that, but it's not necessary in their profession. And I think that's a huge red flag. Totally. If people didn't know that, just please get a mold technician if you're buying property as well.
Yep. So that's part of my utopia. Let's build these places right. When we have water damage situations, let's not sweep it under the rug. Let's acknowledge it. Let's fix it properly. Let's maintain our buildings properly. That's part of my utopia. There's another part of my utopia. You ready?
Okay. Yeah.
Let's get proper ICD codes lined up in our healthcare systems across the globe, so that, when someone is sick and needs treatment, they have the medical coverage to do so. Because a big problem in the U.S. is you got to find a specialist. Specialist might charge $1,500 an hour. Who knows, right?
Oh, it's expensive.
It's expensive, right?
We lost everything in the year that we didn't know it was mold yet. That's the bit that is really expensive. The fact that we don't have a code like that across the world, and we don't have general practitioners and primary care physicians who can go, ooh, I think we need to explore mold for you because of these symptoms. We don't have healthcare practitioners saying, what kind of a home do you live in? Like, that's just not one of the questions.
It needs to be, right? That's part of my utopia. My utopia is they ask you those questions, right?
Yes.
And then, okay, you ask the questions, you find out, right? And then you have coverage. So maybe you pay a copay, but you get everything you need. Now, in the U.S., I can tell you this, there's no mold pill. So, the treatment options are not really covered treatment options because they're not even recognizing this in the first place. Even though mold toxicity has an ICD-10 code in the World Health Organization, even though we know the NIH has a great paper they just put out talking about all the health effects of mold, right? We know that this is a problem. However, there's no codes to really latch onto reliably to get you the coverage you need. So that's part of my utopia. You know what else is part of my utopia? All right, here's the other thing. We have roughly a $1.2 to $1.4 billion problem annually, globally. So this is based on, back of napkin research I've done, okay? About a 1.2 to 1.4
back of napkin research. Well, I need you to unpack that.
It's because back of napkin research is when I really start to dive in and look at different total market analysis. Yeah. And I'm trying to follow me here. I'm explaining everything. You can do the back of napkin research yourself. Basically, it's a $1.2 to $1.4 billion problem. How do we figure that out? Because essentially, mold remediation is a very specific thing. Restoration is a huge thing, okay? Huge market. But that includes water damage. That includes the mold removal. That includes the putting everything back. That includes fires, right? There's a lot of different aspects of restoration. So I'm like, no. Let's just look at the numbers for mold. Yeah. $1.2 to $1.4 billion problem. Now, for those listening, think about it as a global issue. That is not a big global issue. Okay. I've seen governments spend way more than that on way less of an issue. Okay. So then let's extract this for a second. Well, I started saying, well, how much of this is the US? Now, the best numbers that I could find was that the US accounted for somewheres around 40 to 50% of that number. So that brings us down to like 600 million, give or take. This is what I say back of napkin, because this is all rough research, rough numbers. I'm trying to find what I could possibly find.
Yeah.
You know, it's
hard
not
to
perfect.
be exact when we don't actually recognize a problem for what it is, because then you don't get the official numbers on anything because there's no big research.
We're not selling coffee here, guys. You know, we're selling sunglasses. When you look at it from this perspective, you know, a lot of the research is pretty rough research. It's rough numbers. So that's what we're working with. That's why I say it's back in napkin. But just follow me for a minute. So we got 1.2 to 1.4. Let's call it 600, $700 million in the U.S., okay? Then I'm like, all right, well, how much of some of that is covered by insurance? Not a lot of it, but some of it. And then also, this includes commercial, right? So some of that's also commercial, which, you know, that's a whole other animal and the topic to discuss. That's really more of an enforcement issue, not a financial issue. And then you've got, you know, essentially the homeowners, okay? And then we're looking at, well, how some people can afford remediation, right? People that can afford to invest and fix their houses and get their health and their life back. That's you know, I know it still sucks, okay? It's still an unexpected cost, but part of my utopia is that we're going to address these problems so that it's not something you have to confront all the time.
It shouldn't be a privilege either.
It shouldn't be a privilege.
Home should be a human right.
All right, so that's where I'm going with this. So I really extrapolated this, and it's kind of like a $300 million problem. When I say $300 million, this is $300 million worth of remediation that's needed that people cannot afford. That people can't afford. There's not commercial buildings. These are like real homeowners, okay? And so I was thinking, part of my utopia, we'd have a water damage and mold welfare program, just like we have like your traditional welfare program when you're down and out on your luck and you really need help.
Yeah, it's like the SNAP payments of the like environmental toxin.
We need an environmental SNAP payment, okay? So we have this program that people can access into. And it look, just because we got to draw a line somewhere, so there'll be obviously financial requirements and things of that nature. This is like, hey, you have no place to turn. Currently, if you don't have the money, it is a privilege. Truthfully, it is. If you don't have the money, right, what are your options? You can move. Okay, well, that costs money. You could, if you own the place, you could sell the place as is, but that's if you have enough equity in there to actually do that, right? Otherwise, you're kind of trapped and stuck in that. Or you could just, I guess, leave and go live in a tent, right? And people have done that because they're like, I have nowhere else to go. I'm doing that. And listen, do what you got to do to heal, right? But I think the point of the matter is the options are very, very limited.
And if you are largely on your own.
Yeah. Because when you try to tell people what you're going through, they're like, well, I don't understand that. It's just mold. The mold's everywhere. Move on with your life, right? Put that behind you.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it's not that easy, you know, especially like there's this whole convoluted topic in and of itself. But I think that if you look at what government, you know, if we look at and audit what our governments spend money on, I think to spend $300 million as a safety net, what is the total benefit of that cost? Well, let's look at it from this perspective.
It's huge. This is my kind of list. I know what's on the list.
Well, there's a huge list. And again, we're back in napkin here, guys, because here's the numbers that I could find. 22% of all asthma cases are caused by mold. Costs $10 to $30 billion annually, right? Off of that 22%.
Yeah, so conservatively, 22% of asthma cases mold related. Let's be conservative and say $10 billion cost asthma, not the $30 billion.
Let's do it.
And so 22% of that is what, like 220 million? Am I doing my maths right? So like we've almost...
The 22%, the 22% cost is between 10 billion and 30 billion.
Oh, so 2.2 billion. Sorry. Yes, no, I wasn't doing my maths right.
So
we could already save, and that is making the $330 million figure look like a drop in the ocean right there.
It looks like an investment to me Because
Totally an
usually,
investment. Yes.
when you look at investments and liabilities, right, you're like, well, wait a second. So I can spend 300 million and I could save maybe 2 billion plus. We don't know.
Yeah.
2 to 10 billion. Yeah, you could.
Yeah.
Wow. Now
Any stock market investor would be like, I am on to a winner.
Yeah, like, I can get behind that, right? Because here's the thinking. The thinking of this, I've seen it. The problem has been you've had the 90s, like we were on a tear in the 90s. U.S. was, we talked about 1993, black mold killed, 100 infants in Cleveland. We had all this, that they ended up walking that back after all these lawsuits, right? We had the Melinda Ballard case happen, I think in 2000, 2001, somewhere around that time frame, right? And they had all these like big cases that cost hundreds of millions of dollars from a liability perspective. And everybody just started to throw their hands up and say, well, wait a second, what about the cost of all of this? And that's what really happened. And then everybody went back to digging their head in the sand. And now here we are again, 25 years later, 35 years later, and we're like, well, wait a second, we're all getting sick again. We can't keep ignoring this, right? It's become a huge issue. I would say we are more aware today than we even were in the 90s. I feel like there was more public health awareness in the 90s, but I feel like for us, like we as constituents,
we're individually more aware.
We're individually more aware. And now the tide is changing. And one of the things that we put together at Change the Air Foundation was the policy brief. And the policy brief, we hired an amazing firm, Raw Strategic. They did all these numbers for us. That's where we figured out, okay, well, just based upon asthma alone, this is a huge issue, right? Cost-wise. And we started showing those statistics and those data points to politicians, plus showing them the people that have been impacted by it personally, right? Now they're like, oh, this is a no-brainer, right? This makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The cost factor, I will tell you this, the cost of ignoring it far exceeds the cost of fixing this. And that we have to look at this as an investment, right? Not as a pain point. And if we do that and we demand it, we all get up, we're demanding this, we can make this utopia happen.
We absolutely can. I could not agree more. Do you think part of the issue is there are so many different species of mold, and you think about the microbiologists who've put together like the harmful species kind of list? I don't see a huge amount of the species on their list correlate to the list we know in the water damaged building community and the health effects of those. So you don't necessarily see Wallemia, Acatomium on that WHO list, but it is on yours and my list as like a big red flag. How do we get a more cohesive global conversation about which species and specifically the impact of water damage and humidity in builds and events?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there are over 100,000 species that we know of. Right?
Yeah.
And so every other year, I'm seeing more species show up on lab tests, right? And so there was an interesting mold that popped up in a test that I had never seen elevated before in a house. The nice thing about it is, we don't necessarily need to know everything there is to know about each individual mold.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to remember 100,000 different molds and all the different things that they can do.
Well, kind of like gut microbiome and gut bugs, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you're not, but you could know enough to protect yourself. And so the nice thing about this is like, I don't care what kind of mold it is. I can remove it.
Yeah.
If I see it, if it's part of my environment, or if I test for it and I just like, all right, we got a new species of mold here. Well, there's 4.9 million of it detected in a cubic meter.
That's not a healthy
right?
indoor environment.
It's not a great. So this is one of those things where it's just really more helpful to look at the data, understand, doesn't necessarily matter the type of mold, unless we do understand that like the toxigenic species, right? Those are the most dangerous. The mycotoxin producing molds, those are the most dangerous. But here's the thing. Look, I know for a fact we have some of these molds out there that probably produce mycotoxins, and we just don't know it yet. We don't know what mycotoxin it produces. We don't know what type it is. We don't know how dangerous it is, right? And so I think for our sake, just to have some sanity, we have two paths. We can go spend a ton of money and go study this thing.
Every single little species.
Every single little thing. We could do that, okay? Or we could just really take a common sense approach and say, look, we know that buildings are going to have some level of mold, right? We can see that mold's part of our ecosystem. We're not going to be able to build bubbles around our houses. We want to have a normal amount of mold, just like we want our gut microbiome to be normal. We want to have a normal amount of bacteria, a normal amount of flora, right? We want to have a normal amount of mold. When we have an abnormal amount of mold, that's when we start to put ourselves at health risk. And it doesn't, I believe, truthfully, it doesn't matter the species. And the reason I say that is because you can have more of these allergenic species that people would say are benign. But yet, like, you're walking around your house and you're dealing with sinus issues and you're sneezing all the time or you're coughing all the time. Like, that's not a good quality of life.
No.
Right? So we know that there are certain species that might not produce mycotoxins, might not cause these toxic effects, but they're going to be a nuisance, right? Too much of it in your environment, you're going to be sneezing, you're going to be coughing, it's going to be a nuisance. You're going to get sick more frequently. You're going to have these allergy-like symptoms that are unescapable. Who wants to live life like that, right? My recommendation would be this. Look, let's spend more time figuring out how do we standardize just the normal amount of mold that a home could have. And people and everybody seems to be on the same page when we have these thresholds of molds and things are in normal ranges. People generally feel good. I say generally because if you've ever been sick by mold, for a while, until you've really fully healed, you might be sensitive to even lower levels of mold, right? And so I say generally because we have to really look at things from a general perspective. And then we have to also say, well, there are certain people who are going to be hypersensitive because they got sick. And until they really heal, right, they might react to levels of mold that a general person might not react to. We have to be mindful of that. We have to be aware of that. We have to support those people. Okay. But we still have to have a general level of understanding of how to prevent people from getting sick and getting to that level.
And I think everyone can understand like normal blood ranges. Like, there's optimal and we can fight about what that looks like. But, within this normal range, people are more likely to feel well in an indoor environment. And I think if we can all get on board with what that looks like, I agree. I think that's a great way to generalize productively.
And I think it's been tricky. Like, I've seen like different camps argue about different things. And I would say I think the trickiest thing about this is everybody's trying to look at this in a very serious manner and make sure that nobody's getting left behind, right? And so from my perspective, like just talking about somebody who might be hypersensitive, right? Because they've already been impacted, so they're in that fight or flight response, they're going to be even hyperreactive to even small amounts of mold. Well, you don't want to leave that person behind and not have any support systems, right? And so when you look at standardization, we have to look at it from this perspective. How do we create a standard that prevents people from getting sick, right? And then what sort of guidance can we give somebody who might be in a hyper-reactive state?
Yeah.
And how do we protect them as well and give them guidance and not treat them like they're not normal? And I think that has been probably the most difficult part about this is like, how do you come up with a system that doesn't leave people behind? Number one. I think number two is we get lost in the clouds a little bit. It's like, well, which molds are the bad ones? Which ones are the dangerous ones? 100,000 species. Do we have to know all of them? And it's like, no. I think we just need a common sense approach on what does too much mold look like, right? If we have an overgrowth of mold in our environments, right, we want to get those back into normal ranges. What does that look like? And how do we move on regardless of what type of mold it is? Yeah. And I think that's really important. And, and look, we probably need to have some zero tolerance policies. Like there are certain hydrophilic molds that we know are toxigenic that are just not going to show up in an environment, right? And the only way they're going to show up in an environment is if there has been a significant amount of water damage, because some of these molds can take 7-10 days to grow, right? And so those are indicator molds of water damage. We should be like, okay, well, let's get rid of those because we know that they shouldn't be in a non-water damage environment, right? And so I think we can be really strategic about this, be really smart about this, and look at this in a way of really understanding how do we create this sort of standardization of what a safe place to live in looks like. Yeah. And then use that as a guardrail so that when things look out of alignment, right, we can restore it. And I think if we do that, we're going to be set.
Well, I, for one, am very grateful that you are on that journey. I try and talk about it at every opportunity and love having experts like you just join me on the show to just help keep the conversation alive. I think often, especially in podcast land, right, or any kind of media these days, you can, whoa, that was really powerful, that show, oh my gosh, and then 5 days later you're on to the next, oh my gosh. But this is so It's just so insidious and pervasive in our society now, and in the levels of buildings at which water damage and excess humidity is showing up. And we cannot let that flame go out, because I agree with you. I think it's time. I think it's, I literally called my last TED Talk "Is Mold the New Asbestos?" And I really believe it is.
It is. And it's up to us to demand change.
It is.
But it's like we're on the cusp of this. We're on the precipice of change. I see it. I see all the amazing movement in Australia. Obviously, we've seen some great movement in the U.S., some not great movement in the U.S., but we've seen some things. Now, I've seen some doctors come out of the U.K. talking about it, right? Like, we're starting to see this global movement around the importance of indoor air quality. We had cancer research out of UK basically talking about air pollution causing 10% of the cases of cancer. I know air pollution is indoor and outdoor, right? But we're starting to really understand and look at different things outside of the normal health things that we typically see, which is diet and exercise, on why we don't feel so well. Yeah. And I feel like, it's an important discussion, because I'm not going to say it's the main cause or it's causing all chronic illness, but it's got to be contributing to it, right? If all these buildings are sick and all this chronic illness is on the rise, we have all these different things happening. Like, we have to really look at what is the contribution to this, right?
Yeah.
Why did I have asthma as a kid? I lived in a moldy apartment. I actually literally lost the inhaler the day that I moved into my single family home in New Jersey. Mind blown. Went to the doctor, the next appointment, you no longer have asthma. It's a miracle, right? Why do these things happen?
Happy miracle is like, no, thank you. Well, let's call it what it actually is.
Yeah. And I didn't know that asthma was caused by mold. My parents didn't know that asthma was caused by, my doctor never mentioned the word mold, right? Yeah. And so you look at all these things, and so we start to really zoom out here and say, how important is this? Well, I mean, just on the back of napkin numbers we have, it's very important. Yeah. And that's just looking at asthma. Like, we that's
could
just looking at asthma, right?
Keep talking.
Exactly. So I think we have a huge opportunity to demand more research, to put our money where our mouth is, to make the change. Because look, as long as we keep building houses from these guys building them improperly, we're feeding into that. Right? As long as we keep hiring people that don't do a good job, fixing houses, inspecting houses, we're feeding into that. As long as we control what we're spending money on, or as long as we control what we're saying out there and creating awareness on the right things and pushing really the change that we deserve as a civilization, guess what? It's going to happen. I mean, you've been doing this quite a while.
Yeah.
Right? You got sick 10
going
years
on
ago.
10 years of advocacy. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, look, I've been doing this, I think I'm on my 13th year now. Crazy. I could tell you 10 years ago. I mean, I was maybe part of like 0.01% of people.
Yeah, totally. I remember telling people, you need dehumidifiers. We live in Sydney. It's like over 80% 3 months of the year. And people are like, what? And now I'm getting DM after DM. Oh my gosh, it's changed my life. Thank you for recommending that. Yeah.
And the thing is, like, and maybe we've crossed the 3-4% threshold, right? Because we still have conversations and sit downs with families, and they're like not understanding, and they can't get it, and they have to really like walk them through everything, right? So as much of the awareness is growing, we're still a drop in the bucket, right? But in 10 years, you can look around and you can be like, wow, there are so many more people talking about this, right? That's what change looks like.
Yeah.
Change is slow, right?
It's very slow. And when you're in the thick of it, you can feel like you're not moving forward. But that's why I think retrospective check-ins are really important, because, that just kind of makes you go, wow, like that family member laughed at me 5 years ago, and now they're asking my advice on which size dehumidifier to get for their master bedroom. Huh? And you're like, yes, high five, because that was, that's tough. It sucks to be a pioneer. Yeah.
It does suck to be a pioneer. We have to remember something very funny. Doctors 50 years ago were telling you which brand of cigarette to smoke.
Yeah.
So change takes time, about 50 years. And we're on the curve.
Yeah.
We've got momentum. Now's the time, right? We got to keep pushing, keep spreading awareness, keep making people, they have to know. The average person, I think, takes 7 times to see something before they really, really get it or remember it or whatever the actual wording is. Just share stuff like this, right? Just by sharing stuff like this, telling your friends to watch this, blowing people's minds when they start to look at this stuff and really dive into the research. There's great research out there.
There is.
I think when you really start to change people's minds and this starts to spread, what ends up happening? We get our utopia. That's what happens. We get support systems in place. We get government assistance in place. We can go to doctors and they're not gaslighting us. And they're actually very helpful at asking us the right questions to help us understand what's going on when we're not feeling well, right? And builders are building houses. We can go into houses and feel safe and focus on other things.
And actually just live life.
And just live life.
Yeah.
I mean, how great would that be?
So great. Well, here is to utopia. I can't wait to continue this across the pond advocacy together and see us actually get there.
It's going to happen. I might have more gray hair, but we're getting there.
You should just color yours like I do.
I'm letting it grow in, Call me Patches soon.
Too funny. Well, everyone can check out and stay connected with the Change the Air Foundation if you're listening from the US or if you're listening from anywhere else in the world and you want to see how they're doing it. You're doing a great job. I can't wait to chat again. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me, and for every comment, review, share, subscribe. It genuinely means the world and it helps grow the show. I'm so glad you're here.